there a connection between our modern tax system and, say, the prolonging of wars that we've seen in the 20th century and into this century as well?
Oh, there's a lot more than a connection. There's one cannot exist without the other. You know, without tax, if you got rid of all taxes, then war would not be possible. I'm serious. It sounds ridiculous, but tax is how leaders pay for war. Whether it's the tax of the people that are going to war or the tax of the people that they're fighting against, you know, through plunder and conquest. You know, that you conquer another country. You know, if Vladimir Putin conquers Ukraine, he's going to plunder it and then he's going to tax it. You know, what does he want? He wants the land, the labor, the produce, the profit. But taxes make wars possible. But bizarrely, war makes taxes possible. Because, you know, if you'd said to ordinary Americans in 1935, in the middle of the Great Depression, right, we're going to tax everyone, 10, 15, 20%, whatever it is, they would have gone, no, you're not. But suddenly with 1942, you've been bombed by the Japanese. Suddenly there's a justification for it. So war, and it's the same. There's a long history of leaders who've attempted to impose new taxes in times of peace and lost their job as a result, been overthrown, been voted out. But it never happened in times of war. You need the emergency. So tax makes war possible, and war makes tax possible, and the two are linked. And by the way, I count inflation and currency debasement as a type of tax. Our friend Milton Friedman called it taxation without legislation, which is exactly what it is. But it is still a tax. It's a way of transferring wealth from one person to another, of seizing wealth from one person. But again, there's a long history of war and inflation. You pay for a war by debasing the currency. We paid for World War I by coming off the gold standard. A dollar bought you, or a pound bought you a lot more in 1939 than it did in 1945. You know, there's always an inflation during a war. In the Napoleonic Wars, prices tripled.
Wow.
And I'm sure, you know, this war has started with Russia, and they've already got. One of the reasons Putin banned the sale of ammonium nitrate was because of food inflation in Russia, and now that's led to food inflation in the rest of Europe because nobody's got any fertilizer, and so. And you know, we've seen all the waging war on Putin through the monetary system that's going on. It's incredible watching it. I bet China's watching this and going, right, that's what, when we seize Taiwan, that's what America's going to do to us. We better get rid of our dollars now while we can. But because they'll only, you know, China, they've seen what the US will do, and China will be able to defend
China's
against it.
watching.
What I find really interesting is over the last 10 or 15 years, Russia has been relentlessly buying gold, and it's dramatically increased its gold reserves. And, you know, according to my friend Konstantin Kissin, who's Russian, he says Russia's been preparing for this invasion for a long time. And but looking at some of the action that's been reported on social media, it doesn't look like they're that organised. The tanks run out of petrol. But anyway, if it has been preparing, and it's been preparing for de-dollarization and all the rest of it, you know, it's no surprise that it's been buying gold. And as I'm sure you know, China's been accumulating vast amounts of gold as well. It's the biggest producer in the world. It's also the biggest importer. It doesn't export a single ounce.
Do you think they have more than the United
China's
States?
gold holdings are probably already bigger. Yeah, I do. They've declared much less, but if you just look at gold imports just look at gold imports to China, Chinese production, and you add the two together over the last 15 years, and then divide the number by 2. So you assume that half of all the gold that's been produced and mined has gone into private hands, and the other half's gone into the state hands. In all reality, it's probably more than half's gone into the state hands. But if you just assume half, then China has more gold than the United States. And what they're doing is what they declare to the what do they call the IMF is like the minimum believable amount, because China's not ready for a confrontation. China suddenly declared we have more gold than the United States. That would be the biggest declaration of war ever. I'd like to be interested to see what happens to the US dollar if that happened. But in the case of Russia, one wonders, with all the freezing of the accounts and everything that's gone on, if Russia will have to sell its gold, which I guess it would do in Dubai, in order to fund some of what's going on. I don't think we're quite at that point yet. Well, we're quite a long way from that point, but it's an interesting thought experiment.
What do you think about the dollar status as the reserve currency? Do you see that being upended in this decade? Do you, if so, what could possibly replace it? I mean, will people really trust Chinese money? And what role do you think the central bank digital currencies will have? Do you think they will have because they're definitely coming out? Do you think they'll have a negative effect, a neutral effect, or a positive effect on ensuring the dollar status as the reserve currency of the world?
Um, okay, there's two questions there. Will the dollar still be the world's reserve currency in 10 years' time? Probably
Hmm.
just, but it won't be as strong as it is now. The big thing, the big, um, uh, like the ring, as in the Lord of the Rings, the ring of power is owning the banking system and
Hmm.
SWIFT and all of that. Once it loses that, if that ring goes into the fires of Mordor, then the dollar goes with it. So that's the key thing. And I guess the more Bitcoin expands and grows, the more it becomes a threat. I don't know if it's bullshit or not, but I heard somebody saying on Twitter that Putin was considering selling gold for Bitcoin.
Hmm.
Well, America can't control that.
Yep. These last couple months, a lot of people think it's been a huge endorsement for Bitcoin. You had the situation in Canada where they declared a emergency order, Trudeau did, and basically seized people's bank
Yeah,
accounts for nominal things like donating like $20 to the trucker protest, right? And they added cryptocurrency as part of their anti-money laundering campaign, and then they flagged a few crypto wallets that they found to be supporting the trucker protests. And now with this situation with Russia, we have people are predicting like a run on the banks. As we discussed, you're looking at like 40-50% inflation in a matter of days there. People have also been donating to Ukraine through Bitcoin. And who knows how many Russians are now moving or attempting to move more of their wealth into that. Do you think that the last couple months, particularly with this Canada and Russia Ukraine episode, have been anywhere near significant to push Bitcoin adoption across the masses?
yes, I do. Um, my first taste of this was back in, I think, 2013, it would have been. Maybe it was even sooner. Maybe it was as early as 2011, where do you remember
Right.
WikiLeaks was really big back then? And it was seen as a real threat to
Hmm.
the United States and a serious embarrassment to the US military in particular with all the stuff that it was exposing. And people were donating to WikiLeaks via PayPal. And then America did its thing of cutting off the PayPal link. And then people started giving to WikiLeaks via Bitcoin. And then within about within less than a month of that happening, Satoshi was like, no, don't do this, don't do this. And then eventually his line was the hornet's nest is the hornets are out of the nest or whatever the line was, and he just stood down from the project altogether because it was very early in Bitcoin's evolution. It's probably too early to be making
Hmm.
an enemy of the United States authorities when it just wanted to get beneath the radar and spread. That guy was a genius. My God,
Right.
I think he must be the cleverest person who's ever lived. But I mean, his reading of things was amazing, and he was probably like, he'd seen what had happened to the PGP dude in the early 1990s when they arrested him just for inventing this privacy technology, and he didn't want it to happen to him, which is probably why he disappeared and why he's kept his identity secret all that time. But so we saw it then, and then the authorities steal $9 million from
Right.
GoFundMe that was destined for the truckers, and that
Hmm.
was literally theft. And presumably, there's going to be all sorts of legal suits in America, in Canada at some point. Um, but good luck trying to win against the government in a legal suit because you're taking on the whole system. But that was theft, and they had no right to do that. But I guess from the government's point of view, these truckers were creating all sorts of disruption, and they needed it to end, and so they would take whatever measures are necessary to make it end. They won't see the truckers as these in the same way that people sharing videos of them on Twitter will see them. But I just looked at that and I was
Hmm.
like, Bitcoin fixes this.